Viking warrior, you have just sailed across the North Sea with your crew. You have landed on an enemy coast. Your ship is pulled onto the beach. Your men are exhausted. They have been rowing for days. But you cannot simply lie down and sleep like you would at home. You are surrounded by people who want to kill you. You are in a foreign land. You do not know the terrain. You do not know where the enemy is hiding. You do not know if local forces are gathering to attack. So how did Viking warriors actually sleep in these situations? How did they rest while staying alive? How did they manage to recover their strength when danger was constant? This is the central question we need to answer, because the Vikings were not superhuman. They needed sleep just like any soldier needs sleep, but they also needed to survive, and these two requirements seem to contradict each other. Yet the Vikings developed a system that allowed them to do both. They created methods and routines that let them rest safely in enemy territory. Understanding this system explains why Viking raids were so effective and why they were so feared. The first thing to understand is that Viking warriors did not sleep the way modern soldiers sleep. They did not have military barracks. They did not have secure camps with walls and guards rotating on scheduled shifts. Instead, they worked with what they had. They used the environment. They used their ships. They used their numbers. They used their organization. These elements combined created a sleeping system that was actually quite sophisticated. When Vikings landed on a coast, the first decision was always about location. They did not choose random beaches. They chose specific types of places. They preferred areas where their ships could be beached and protected. They looked for locations with natural barriers. A river mouth was ideal. A beach with high cliffs behind it was useful. A location near forests gave them cover and escape routes. They avoided open plains where they could be seen from far away. They avoided areas where they could be trapped. The location itself was the first layer of their sleeping security. Once the location was chosen, the Vikings would establish what we might call a temporary camp. But this was not a leisurely camp. This was a defensive position. The ships themselves became the center of the camp. The Vikings would often form their ships into a defensive line. They would position them so the camp was protected on one side by water. This meant enemies could not attack from that direction. It meant the Vikings had an escape route. If danger became too great, they could push the ships back into the water and leave. Around the ships, the Vikings would create a perimeter. They would gather whatever materials were available, driftwood, rocks, branches. They would create barriers and obstacles. These were not tall walls like castle walls. They were more like fences and checkpoints. The purpose was not to completely stop an attack. The purpose was to slow down an attack, to give warning, to create a choke point where defenders could concentrate their numbers. The camp itself was organized in a specific way. The strongest and most alert warriors would position themselves at the outer edges, and the younger men and the less experienced fighters would be closer to the ships. The leaders and commanders would be positioned centrally, where they could see and respond to any direction. This arrangement meant that if an attack came, the outer warriors would fight first. They would buy time for others to wake up and prepare. This was not about individual heroism. This was about survival through organization. Now, the actual sleeping arrangements. Vikings did not sleep in shifts the way modern military units do. They did not have organized watch rotations with some men sleeping while others stood guard. Instead, they slept in a different way. Many Vikings would sleep lightly. They would sleep in their armor or with their weapons close beside them. They could wake quickly if needed. They trained themselves to do this from childhood. A warrior could go from deep sleep to combat readiness in seconds. Some Vikings would sleep more deeply than others. The younger, stronger men could afford to sleep harder. The more experienced warriors often slept lighter. They could wake at the slightest sound. This was a skill developed over years. It was not something that happened naturally. Warriors trained to recognize danger sounds. They learned to distinguish between normal night sounds and sounds that meant threat. A branch breaking in a specific way, a voice in an unfamiliar language, the sound of armor moving. These would wake them instantly. The Vikings also used their numbers strategically for sleep. They did not all sleep at the same time in the same place. Small groups would sleep together. A group of 5 or 6 men might sleep near each other. They would arrange themselves in a circle or a line. One man in the group might sleep lighter than the others. He would be the first to wake if something happened. He would wake the others. Within moments, a group of 5 rested men could become 5 armed warriors. Equipment played a role in how Vikings slept. They did not remove their armor when resting. They might remove helmets. They might loosen straps, but they kept their basic protection on. This meant they could move to combat faster. It also meant they stayed warm. Sleeping in armor in a cold climate was actually beneficial. The metal retained body heat. Multiple men sleeping close together shared warmth. Weapons stayed within arm's reach. A Viking would sleep with his sword beside him. His shield would be nearby. His spear would be close. This was not paranoia. This was practical. If danger came, he needed immediate access to his weapons. Reaching across a sleeping companion to find a sword took too long. Having weapons within immediate reach meant faster response. The Vikings also used their natural environment for security. They would position camps near water sources, not just for drinking, but because water provided warning. An enemy approaching would have to cross water or go around it. This created delay and noise. They would camp in areas with good visibility. They could see approaching forces from a distance. They would choose high ground when possible. This gave them advantage if fighting became necessary. The routine of sleeping in enemy territory was consistent. As darkness fell, the Vikings would prepare the camp. Fires would be lit. Not large fires that could be seen from far away, but enough for warmth and cooking. Food would be prepared and eaten. Men would check their weapons and armor. They would drink water. Then, as night deepened, the sleeping would begin. But it was never complete rest. It was managed rest, controlled rest, rest that could be interrupted at any moment. This system worked because it was not based on the assumption of safety. It was based on the assumption of danger. Every element of their sleeping arrangement assumed that enemies might attack. The location choice assumed threat. The camp organization assumed threat. The light sleeping assumed threat. The weapon positioning assumed threat. By building the entire system around the expectation of danger, the Vikings created a system that could handle danger when it came. Understanding how Vikings slept in enemy territory requires understanding something deeper. It requires understanding Viking discipline. Modern people often think of Vikings as chaotic warriors. People imagine them as wild and uncontrolled. This image is incorrect. The Vikings who survived raids and who built an empire across Europe were highly disciplined. This discipline extended to every aspect of their lives, including how they rested. Discipline in Viking culture was taught from childhood. Young boys were trained not just in combat, but in control. They learned to manage fear. They learned to manage fatigue. They learned to manage pain. A Viking warrior was expected to function effectively even when tired, even when scared, even when injured. This mental training was as important as physical training. It was the foundation that allowed them to sleep lightly in dangerous situations and still wake ready to fight. The routine of a Viking camp during a raid followed a strict pattern. This pattern was not written down. It was not formally taught in the way modern military training works. Instead, it was learned through experience. Younger warriors learned by watching older warriors. They learned by doing. They learned by surviving. Those who did not follow the routine did not survive. Those who did survive passed the knowledge to the next generation. Over centuries, this created a system that was remarkably consistent. The day would begin before dawn. This was deliberate. The Vikings understood that dawn was a dangerous time. Enemies often attacked at dawn because visibility was increasing, but defenders were still waking. So Vikings woke before dawn. The camp would begin to move before the sun appeared. Men would check their weapons. They would eat. They would prepare for the day. By the time dawn actually arrived, they were already alert and ready. Any enemy attempting a dawn attack would find Vikings already awake and prepared. During the day, the Vikings maintained a specific routine. If they were not actively raiding or fighting, they would perform maintenance tasks. Weapons would be cleaned and sharpened. Armor would be checked for damage. Ships would be inspected and repaired if necessary. These tasks served multiple purposes. They kept equipment functional. They also kept men occupied and alert. Idle warriors become careless warriors. Occupied warriors remain sharp. The Vikings also used the daylight hours to scout. Small groups of men would move away from the camp. They would explore the surrounding territory. They would look for signs of enemy movement. They would identify escape routes. They would find water sources and food sources. This scouting served the practical purpose of gathering information. It also served another purpose. It kept men active during daylight. It meant they were more likely to be genuinely tired when night came. A tired man sleeps better. A tired man sleeps more soundly. This was actually beneficial for the camp because more men could sleep deeper if they had been active during the day. Food and drink played an important role in the sleeping routine. Vikings did not have the luxury of modern nutrition science, but they understood instinctively that what a man ate affected his sleep. They ate substantial meals before sleeping. Meat was preferred when available. Grains and bread were eaten. These foods provided sustained energy. They also promoted sleep. A man with a full stomach sleeps better than a hungry man. A man with adequate nutrition has more physical and mental resilience. Water was also carefully managed. Men would drink water throughout the day, but they would not drink excessively before sleeping. This was practical. A man who needs to urinate cannot sleep deeply. He must wake and leave the camp. This creates vulnerability. So the Vikings managed their water intake. They drank enough to stay hydrated. They drank enough to stay alert. But they did not drink so much that sleep would be interrupted. Alcohol played a complex role in Viking sleeping routines. Vikings drank beer and mead. These were common beverages, but the timing and amount were controlled during raids. And a warrior on a raid would not get drunk. Drunkenness meant inability to wake quickly. It meant inability to fight effectively. A drunk warrior was a liability. So while Vikings enjoyed alcohol, they did not drink heavily during active raids. They might drink after a successful raid. They might drink during celebrations. But during the vulnerable sleeping hours in enemy territory, alcohol consumption was minimal. The positioning of warriors during sleep followed specific patterns. This was not random. Warriors who had worked together before would sleep near each other. They understood each other's movements. They could wake each other without panic. A stranger waking you suddenly can cause confusion. A familiar companion waking you causes immediate understanding. So the Vikings organized their sleeping groups based on relationships and experience. Men who had fought together before would sleep together. The senior warriors in each group would position themselves on the outer edges. They would be the first to encounter any threat. They would be the ones most likely to wake first. Once awake, they would wake the others. This created a cascade effect. One man waking meant 5 men awake within moments. 5 men awake meant 20 men awake within minutes. The entire camp could go from sleeping to combat readiness very quickly. The Vikings also understood the importance of psychological preparation for sleep. Before resting, warriors would mentally prepare themselves. They would visualize potential threats. They would think through possible responses. This mental preparation meant that when danger came, the response was not a surprise. It was a reaction to something they had already considered. This reduced panic. It increased effectiveness. Weapons maintenance was also part of the sleeping routine. A warrior would check his sword before sleeping. He would check the edge. He would check for damage. He would wipe away any blood or rust. This served a practical purpose. A weapon in good condition works better, but it also served a psychological purpose. Checking and maintaining a weapon was a ritual. It was a way of preparing mentally for potential combat. It was a way of saying to oneself, I am ready, I am prepared, I can handle what comes. The Vikings also used sound and silence strategically during sleep. They did not maintain complete silence. Some noise was normal. Sleeping men sometimes make sounds. Animals make sounds. Wind makes sounds. Complete silence would actually be unusual and might indicate something was wrong. So the Vikings expected normal night sounds. They trained themselves to recognize which sounds were normal and which sounds meant danger. They also used sound offensively. If an attack seemed imminent, a single warrior might shout or make noise. This would wake the entire camp instantly. The sound itself would also alarm the attackers. It would show them that the camp was alert. It would reduce the advantage of surprise. Often this single shout would be enough to stop an attack before it began. An attacker wants to surprise sleeping enemies. If those enemies are clearly awake and alert, the attack becomes much less attractive. The routine of sleeping in enemy territory was about creating a system where rest and security could coexist. It was about understanding that warriors needed sleep to function. But it was also about understanding that security could not be compromised. The Vikings solved this apparent contradiction through discipline, organization, and routine. Every element of their sleeping system was designed to serve both purposes, to allow genuine rest and to maintain constant readiness for danger. The final piece of understanding how Vikings slept in enemy territory is understanding why this system actually worked. It was not luck, it was not magic, it was not superhuman ability, it was a system. A carefully developed system that had been refined over centuries. This system combined multiple elements working together. When all these elements functioned properly, the result was both rest and security. When any element failed, the consequences could be deadly. The foundation of the system was trust. Vikings who slept together had to trust each other completely. They had to trust that the man next to them would wake at danger. They had to trust that he would wake them. They had to trust that he would fight beside them. This trust was not based on friendship alone. It was based on shared experience. Men who had fought together before knew how each other would react. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. This knowledge created real trust, not sentimental trust. Practical trust based on proven behavior. This trust extended to the entire camp structure. A warrior sleeping in the center of the camp had to trust that the warriors on the perimeter would wake first and fight first. He had to trust that they would give him time to wake and prepare. The warriors on the perimeter had to trust that the warriors behind them would come to help. This mutual trust meant that each warrior could sleep, knowing that others were taking responsibility for his security. This allowed deeper, more restful sleep. The system also worked because of specialization. Not all Vikings had the same role during sleep. Some men were designated as lighter sleepers. These were usually the most experienced warriors. They understood that their role was to be the first line of defense while others rested. They accepted this responsibility. They trained themselves to sleep lightly. They positioned themselves strategically. They took pride in this role. They understood that their vigilance kept everyone alive. This specialization meant that the best defenders were in the best positions to defend. The Vikings also understood something that modern sleep science has confirmed. Human beings have natural sleep cycles. A person does not sleep the same way for 8 hours straight. Instead, sleep comes in cycles of roughly 90 minutes. Within each cycle, there are periods of lighter sleep and deeper sleep. The Vikings did not know the science behind this, but they understood the practical reality. A man who has been asleep for 30 minutes can wake more easily than a man who has been asleep for 2 hours. So the Vikings would rotate their sleeping arrangements. Not formally, but naturally. Men would sleep for periods of time, then wake and take positions of higher alert. Then other men would sleep. This natural rotation meant that the camp always had men at different levels of alertness. Some men would be deeply asleep. Some would be lightly asleep. Some would be awake. This created a graduated response system. If danger came, the awake men would respond first. If the threat was small, they might handle it without waking others. If the threat was larger, they would wake the lightly sleeping men. If the threat was massive, the entire camp would wake. This graduated response meant that the camp did not waste energy and resources on false alarms, but it also meant that the camp could respond to real threats with full force. Environmental factors were also crucial to the system. The Vikings chose their sleeping locations carefully. As mentioned before, location was the first layer of defense, but location also affected the quality of sleep. A location with natural shelter was better than an exposed location. Men sleep better when they are warm and dry. A location near water meant men could drink without leaving the camp. A location near trees meant firewood was available. A location with good visibility meant the camp could see approaching threats from far away. All of these environmental factors contributed to both security and the quality of sleep. The Vikings also used technology to enhance their sleeping security. Their shields could be positioned around the sleeping area as additional barriers. Their spears could be planted in the ground as obstacles. Their ships themselves became fortifications. The Vikings understood that they could not create perfect security, but they could create layers of security. An attacker would have to overcome multiple obstacles before reaching sleeping warriors. Each obstacle created delay. Each delay created opportunity for the camp to wake and respond. The system also worked because of realistic expectations. The Vikings did not expect to sleep as well in enemy territory as they would at home. They accepted that their sleep would be interrupted. They accepted that they would be tired. They accepted that they would need to function while fatigued. This acceptance meant they did not panic when sleep was poor. They did not become desperate. They simply adapted. They managed their fatigue. They worked with what they had. This psychological acceptance was crucial. A warrior who expects poor sleep and gets poor sleep can handle it. A warrior who expects good sleep and gets poor sleep becomes frustrated and makes mistakes. The Vikings also understood the importance of morale for sleep. A warrior who is confident in his camp's security sleeps better than a warrior who is afraid. So maintaining morale was part of the sleeping system. The leaders would position themselves visibly. They would speak confidently about the camp's defenses. They would show that they trusted the system. This confidence was contagious. Other warriors would see their leader's confidence and feel more secure. This security allowed better sleep. Better sleep meant better performance. Better performance meant better survival. Food and nutrition continued to play a role throughout the night. Vikings understood that a man's body needed fuel. If a warrior woke during the night, food might be available. Not elaborate meals, simple food, bread, dried meat, nuts. These foods could be eaten quickly and quietly, and they would provide energy without requiring much time or attention. This meant warriors could recover some energy even during the night. It meant they could function better the next day. The system also included contingency plans. The Vikings understood that things could go wrong, ships could be damaged, the camp could be discovered, enemies could attack in overwhelming numbers. So the Vikings had escape plans. They knew which direction they would run. They knew where the ships were. They knew how to get to the ships quickly. They had practiced these movements. Some warriors would be designated to stay and fight. Others would be designated to protect the retreat. This meant that even if the camp was overrun, not everyone would die. Some would escape. The group would survive to fight another day. The ultimate reason this system worked was because it was based on reality, not fantasy. The Vikings did not pretend they could sleep safely in enemy territory. They accepted that they could not. Instead, they created a system that allowed them to sleep despite the danger. They created layers of security. They created organization. They created routine. They created trust. They created specialization. They created contingency plans. When all these elements worked together, the result was a system that allowed warriors to rest while maintaining security. This system is why Viking raids were so effective. The warriors were rested. Not perfectly rested, but rested enough to function at high levels. They were alert. They were organized. They were disciplined. They could fight effectively. They could make good decisions. They could adapt to changing circumstances. An enemy facing a Viking raiding party was facing warriors who had managed to get sleep despite the dangers. They were facing warriors who were both rested and alert. This combination was powerful. This combination was why Vikings were feared. The question we began with was, how did Viking warriors sleep in enemy territory? The answer is that they created a system based on understanding human needs, a system based on understanding security requirements, a system based on organization and discipline, a system that allowed rest and security to coexist. This system was not perfect. Warriors still died, raids still failed. But the system worked well enough that Vikings could conduct raids across Europe for centuries. The system worked well enough that they became legends. The system worked well enough that we still remember them today. And that, perhaps, is the most important measure of success.